Hello and welcome to news on Plague Tapes 120, which is going out to you on the 27th of December, the day after Stephen's Day in 2021. And Andrew's with me as always to bring us a sight of the I don't know what it is, the disaster that is looming.
That's probably what feels like an increasingly fairish description. Like it, at the very least, cases are now doubling in each week, but those, because we started at such a high base and are now at such a high number, we don't have anything like enough testing to see what's happening properly. So, for instance, today there was only, I think, 6,735 cases reported, although only is kind of a funny word to be using in that context. However, the positivity rate was 49.7%. Now, I think the highest positivity we've had before was about 25% last January in that surge. So that, the only other place I've seen a positivity that high was South Africa, actually. They peaked around 52%.
Oh, that's a lovely comparison.
Yeah. So, I mean, both that and, like, anecdotally, and everybody who listens to the show is going to have multiple relations, friends who've tested positive will have had to cancel plans. You're all very well aware of just how much COVID there is out there. We've had 61,000 cases this week alone, right? And that's with the limited testing. So with that and the doubling, it's not unreasonable to think within 2 weeks we'll have 200,000 a week. And the problem with that is that at a minimum would be another about 200 to 220 people needing ICU the following week. In other words, that capacity wouldn't be there.
200,000 cases a day?
No, a week.
Okay, so you have to...
We won't know. The thing is, like, we couldn't test and find 200,000 cases because we don't have enough testing capacity.
Yeah.
So... What would I... So we won't see 200,000 in a week, but we'll probably have that or more. We're probably well on our way towards that, according to where we currently are. The only...
hold on, how many figures, what have we got in terms of just single cases? What are we hitting now, 10,000 a day?
So testing at the moment is kind of rubbish because of Christmas. We had 2 days back, we had 13,000. And then we had a 10,000, and then we had 6,700 today. So it actually looks like a peak and then a fall, but that's obviously that's just Christmas.
Okay. So the 13,000 is probably the more accurate figure if we're looking at a daily rate.
Yeah, well, I would guess that today we're probably somewhere between 15 and 18,000.
Okay.
And that positivity of 50% is giving us a clue that it's way above 6,500, but we really don't know how far above.
Okay, so can just give us an indication, just break down what positivity of 50% means.
That means of every 2 people who got tested, one of them was positive.
Right. Okay, and when
that would normally be like...
Once you go over something like 12%, you're
5%,
missing loads of people.
5%.
5%.
No, in the summer that would have been 1 person in 20 was testing positive. So now 1 in 2 instead gives an idea, right? And that gives us a clue as to how many cases are probably being missed. Everybody's going to know people who are positive on antigen testing and are trying to get a PCR test and haven't managed to book an appointment, or if they have it in a couple of days or whatever else.
Is there any way that you can extrapolate from a positivity of 50%?
Yeah, not really, no.
There's no idea.
I wouldn't know how to guess it.
Yeah,
I'd be looking at the trajectory of the way cases were going up, and I'd be saying it looks to me like we're between 15 and 18,000.
Yeah, okay.
If we had testing capacity, but
And the other thing you were saying is just in the last, just to put it in perspective, we've had something like, is it 200,000 people, 200,000 cases since the beginning of November or something like that. You were saying there was a figure.
Yeah, it's it must be about 230,000 today since the beginning of November.
Which also I think is good to put it in perspective in terms of so that's
60,000 of those last week.
60,000 in 1 week.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And okay, and so obviously we're also working in this strange time where it's Christmas, and so we're not hearing from anybody. I presume everybody's gone home for Christmas, so nobody's really talking. Was there something that Tony said recently? Apparently Tony is still talking about things.
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting in terms of what to expect, because he basically said no households should be visiting other households, you know. And the current recommendations are, I think you're allowed of either 3 or 4 households. You can have 3 over, isn't it?
I think it was 3, was it?
Yeah.
I don't think it was more than 3.
I don't think anybody's really been paying that much attention to it one way or the other. But if we were to actually go back to a situation where it's none, I think we'd be talking about a lockdown in that context. And obviously, in terms of what I'm talking about, in terms of cases in 2 weeks' time and then ICU 10 days after that, that also looks to me like we're looking at a lockdown, basically. Not 100% certain, because, I mean, there's various bits of hopium you could be having around this that might reduce the cost of the surge, but the problem is we're running out of time to actually take effective action because of the way ICU lags infections by about 2 to 3 weeks. So yeah. It's all pretty sobering.
Yeah, it is. Like, I mean, obviously, I'm definitely picking that up. The question I have is like, where, like, so you're operating, like, it seems like where everybody's aware of how bad it is, but actually at the same time there's very little information coming through. Like, I mean, we still haven't not had a press conference from NPHET, have we, since in 2 months? Is it 2 months now?
I'm not sure when the last one was, but in
like,
quite a while.
In quite a long time. What about HSE press conferences?
They did one, was it last Thursday? Last Wednesday they did one, so it was a little bit early. And even in the context of the last Wednesday, was it obvious? It must have been obvious at that stage, was it, that things were going, or has it just... I mean, if we had 60,000 cases last week, we must have had about 15,000 of them before Wednesday, did we? Well, not. I mean, I can't remember the exact figures, but actually not necessarily. No, like the cases last week. Sorry, the cases the previous week to now were 30,000. So it's doubled in a week, basically. Okay. So last Wednesday, of course, there was obviously concern looking at the increase and looking at what was happening in other countries, but it hadn't quite happened here yet. Okay. And I think there was probably, like, at that point we didn't know we'd be seeing a doubling in a week or less. It's probably going to be less by the time it gets going properly. So you might have hoped it would be a bit more strung out or whatever. I mean, they definitely knew that the crisis was coming.
They just didn't see the scale of it.
You wouldn't know the scale of it necessarily. Yes, yeah.
And so now obviously we're all aware, or we will be aware when people listen to this show. They'll be aware of the scale of it. And what are we expecting in terms of what's going to happen from the powers to be? Like, we have no idea.
No idea.
Just literally.
Yeah.
Are we going to wait for them to come back from Christmas to make a decision on this?
Like the sequence that would normally happen would be NPHET would have a meeting, so we'd hear NPHET were going to meet. Yeah. I suspect that will probably happen.
I would think they'll probably meet anyway.
Wednesday or Thursday. Yeah. Probably there may be a crisis meeting this evening. Then they'd meet with Cabinet. Sorry, the Cabinet sub-committee. Because remember, they put all these extra steps in. Yeah. And then that would then meet with the Cabinet, and then a recommendation would come out of that. So typically between points where there's obviously a crisis and between where action is taken, we've seen a period of about 10 days. That would be a bit of a disaster in the current context if things keep going as they are, because it would be another 20 days for that to have enough.
I think we can take the bit out. I think it would be a disaster.
Yeah. So,
do we even know if the subcommittees are meeting? We don't know if NPHET are meeting. Do we know?
No, then there's been an awful lot of bullshit around the, like the politicians trying to show they're in charge by not being rushed into things and delaying stuff. And
we won't be bullied around by the scientists and the medical people.
Like, we had that this time last year, and it was a disaster. It meant instead of, instead of maybe having 800 deaths and a month-long lockdown, we ended up with 2,000 and a 5-month-long lockdown, you know. So I don't trust them not to make exactly the same mistake again. But yeah, so we'll see. I mean, the things that might alter things a bit is we haven't yet seen the impact of closing hospitality at 8. Whether that shrunk stuff down. Personally, I suspect it probably didn't have much of an impact, and the impact it had was probably counteracted by Christmas and increased socialisation around that anyway. But that's one thing. Secondly, I think people will have shifted their behaviours again probably about a week back as things became, you know, as the speed of spread of Omicron started to become obvious. And also just with the amount of people who started testing positive in their immediate circles. And obviously quite a lot of people tested positive before Christmas Day, and therefore plans were cancelled or changed or whatever else. Like most people will have had that. So that may have had an impact on, like, because the thing to really worry about is the current wave is, as usual, very much among younger people.
Yeah.
Christmas obviously is the real problem of younger people and older people mix, and then in the period we're in now, then some of those older people become sick and they get hospitalised at higher rates and stuff. But maybe that effect will be smaller. There's some hope that Omicron is less severe in that the initial infection is we talked about this in the last show, I think, the upper airways rather than the lungs. And that may mean that there's fewer... It appears to mean there's fewer people needing to go into ICU in the very early data from the countries that have got hit a little bit faster than us, but it's really too early to be sure about that. It's kind of all anecdote at the moment. But that could make an appreciable difference, but not a huge one at the rate of case increases we're seeing. So that's that's the problem. Like as I was saying, if you kind of if you want to do the wing and the prayer, it is that there is something that causes the peak to be well short of everybody becoming infected. And we don't know what that is. But that looks like it might have happened in South Africa. So
that does sound like we're really clutching.
Yeah.
I mean, if that's what we're relying on. And is there any data in terms of the cases that are coming through? I mean, even say if we go back to the 13,000 people that were positive on Wednesday, what kind of age bracket are they? Are they the younger? I
haven't seen that data hasn't been available the last few days.
Okay, so
but it was the case that before that it was like overwhelmingly in the 15 to 34 year age bands. That was where most of the cases were. And in fact, over 65s was very low. It was something like 3.5% of cases, which is probably the impact of boosters, but that's boosters basically working against Delta. Omicron wouldn't have been in circulation enough to get 14-day figures for that. So, yeah.
And, yeah, okay, so then that leads me to the other question about, like, what kind of data do we have in terms of what percentage is Omicron and what percentage is old style Delta?
I think they said last night that they thought it was 80%.
Okay.
So it's pretty much going to be dominant.
It's the dominant variant. Yeah. But and when you were saying last night, what was this a press conference?
No, I just saw that figure given. It might have been in the press release.
Okay. Right. So it's just on the press release, right? So I mean, this strikes me as being like remarkably sobering in terms of this is the worst. It's kind of one of the worst shows I can remember doing, and it's not helped by the fact that we seem to have gone into Christmas with this kind of false sense of I think invincibility because of the way that this was controlled in terms of the media, like blocking out NPHET and everything else, and the government recommendations, and closing the pubs at 8 o'clock as opposed to 5 o'clock, which all leads you to believe that it's not something that you need to worry about too much, and it's carry on regardless. So it does look from the outset like they've just replicated what they did last Christmas. Would that be a fair criticism?
Variation on a theme rather than replicating it, but yes, it feels like we've gone through something similar. I think, like, my anecdotal impression is that the public were more wary, because there seemed to be an awful lot of restaurants and pubs giving out that they were empty or nearly empty in the run up to it. So,
but you see, like, that doesn't. It doesn't give me any reassurances, because you're talking about the 15 to 35-year-old or whatever, who are the demographic that normally do that kind of, you know, socializing. They're the ones it's aimed at, those socializing, and then those people who, if they did that, they're probably not likely to take really antigen tests or whatever. And like, so what? There's it just feels like a domino effect in terms of, like, we went into this with increasing cases from a really high starting point, and now we're just beyond Christmas. And if you think about the 10-day lag or the whatever 7-day lag, that the scale of what's just happened we're not even aware of it. We won't be aware of it until the first week in January.
Yep, that's pretty much.
Yeah, so
that's pretty much it. Yeah, and for all the talk about antigen testing, I mean, an awful lot of people in that younger age group live with parents.
Yeah.
Who obviously onto that younger age group. So, like, antigen testing in that setting is relatively limited because household transmission rates are so high. So yeah, that's you know, like, it obviously, it helps skim off some of the cases, but it's not like it's going to catch all of them, you know. And there was definitely, yeah, I mean, the you know, again, the positives is about half the adults had received a booster and will be starting to work, you know, as we roll forward a bit. So all those things will reduce the cost perhaps considerably. We may not be looking at something that's quite as bad as last year from that point of view, although it might be from the level of hospitalizations. But in terms of deaths and possibly even ICU, it should be lower. But
what kind of hospitalization figures are we already dealing with?
So far, it's
and is this, like,
so there's
680?
461 in hospital at the moment, right? Which is low by recent figures and high by the point we had lockdowns in previous waves. And we've had, the last 8 days, the number of new hospital cases as a total in the preceding week has increased, right? So that's an early lead indicator I use to see when we're heading into trouble.
This is Omicron.
Well, that'll be some of that is probably Delta as well, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's where we are currently. So they have, like, I was looking at the HSE do an operations report every morning,
right.
Which basically tells you how many beds are available and things like that.
Yeah.
And so we, like, in the run up to Christmas, they will write down, typically it was about 130 beds a day.
Okay.
At the moment, it's up about 1,400. And we know anecdotally that they're ringing and cancelling people's routine operations and things like that that were due to take place this week. So basically what they've done is, and they did this last year as well, is you just get rid of everybody else you can out of hospital so you have room. So yeah, so there's, as of this morning, there were 1,400 beds. So we're not going to fill general hospital beds with COVID patients for that's probably 2 to 3 weeks away, I guess. And in terms of that, and they can probably create more space there.
But they're not ICU beds now.
No, the ICU ones are the crisis, and that is not so rosy, because we've 91 in ICU at the moment, which is far ahead of any previous lockdown.
Yeah.
And somewhere here I have the figure. There's so basically, they think they can have 350 total ICU beds by surge capacity, right? So that's where you repurpose operating theatres, you redeploy staff from other areas of the hospital, etc., etc. So that's about 100 available beds in terms of where we are at the moment.
Okay.
Which is not very much.
No.
They can probably I mean, so one of the reasons you end up going into lockdown is not just to stop more people going into ICU for COVID, but because in a lockdown there were fewer car crashes, there were fewer accidents, there were fewer other things that create a need for ICU as well. So that's the other reason I'm kind of looking at that and going, I think that's the way the stats are starting to point. We'll see more definitely within a day or two, I suspect. Like, not that ICU will be increasing, but we'll see if the rate of people going into ICU starts falling radically, because that's basically what you'd need. But it's going to be a decision they're going to have to make off the models, because if you wait for it to happen, well then it's a complete disaster, because then it's 20 days later before any action happens. So, but
is there any indication that they are going to make it off the models, or are they going to wait and see?
Well, there's been no sound from government at all for like a week at this point. So, which is again what they did last year as well. Like, they allowed the crisis to develop, and then, I think they decided that everything was closing on New Year's Eve. Was it last year? So I would not.
They're going to have to meet to decide that, though. So even then, you would hope that NPHET are having an emergency meeting today or tomorrow at the latest, and then that subcommittee is actually meeting, that they'll pull them out of wherever they are, and then you would think that still, either way, I couldn't see cabinet meeting any earlier than maybe next Tuesday. That's usually how slow it
yeah.
But it shouldn't. It should happen much faster than that. Great. I know you're doing your best to try and find silver things, but there doesn't seem to be anything. It just feels.
It's a bit it's going to be bad. I think you can say that. We don't. It's hard to tell how bad it's going to be. That's the one question. Like, my question would be, will it be as bad as last year? And I think my answer to that currently would be, it definitely shouldn't be, and it probably won't be. But you
can't say anything with a guarantee. There's no guarantees.
That's dependent on smart decisions being quickly made, and my confidence in that is quite low at the moment, I'd have to say. So we shall see. I mean, we're basically we are 100% relying on the vaccines to minimise cost at the moment. That's the reality of it. We're lucky. Well, not lucky, but we did a good job of getting people vaccinated. So we do a very high level of vaccination and a very high level of boosters, but we know they're not 100% effective. And the problem is with the Omicron situation, with literally the potential for millions of people to get infected, because that is what we're actually looking at. Well, then the 1 in 1,000 of a million is a big number, basically, in terms of people who need ICU, or the 2 in 1,000 of a million who probably will die even though they're vaccinated. It turns into a fairly big number when you're talking 2 million people or whatever. So that's that's my one area of uncertainty. And Omicron is also going to be, it's going to be very tough to actually stop. So that
seems, given that it's like already 80%, like even before we got to this stage, and we think maybe 15 to 18,000 cases now, and it's doubling in less than a week. Although that seems like astounding figures in terms of, it's nothing. It's even like, and Delta was like what, 3 times more infectious. That's why it became the dominant variant. So we're now looking at something that's more dominant than the dominant variant. So that's a beast. Like, the more data that comes out about it in terms of fitness and ability to infect, the more the more alarming it is at the level of man. I don't know if we can do anything to stop this. And that's all the bets are basically on the vaccinations being able to stop it. But
and the only counterweight to that is evidence that it may be that it is a bit less severe in itself, but also that in terms of everybody being vaccinated, that's a huge additional layer of protection. So
but just even like remind me how, like, we didn't even know of this thing. How long ago is it since we actually first? It's only within a month.
Yeah, it's very fast.
And does it, like, listening to the virologists and all that stuff, are they also equally astounded about this how infectious this thing is and how it's taken off?
I would say so. Most of the people I listen to are very reluctant to say anything until there's definite data.
Right.
And this has moved much faster than the definite data.
Yeah.
So what you're really relying on is some sort of early clue, or kind of epidemiologists that are just looking at the pattern of it shifting to the population and going, "Oh, look!"
Yeah. So
all those straight lines going
yeah.
straight up. And so early studies using neutralizing serum, so from people who've been infected or from people who've been vaccinated, and petri dishes, essentially black assays, and seeing its ability to overcome immunity, all that sort of stuff. It's all very, like, the science is only really starting to happen at the most basic level,
right.
and it different quite reputable studies are saying quite different things about severity.
Okay.
So
right.
like between Denmark, England and Scotland even, the range of reduced severity is quite big in terms of it. Right. And over time we'll find out why that is and which one is closer to what our experience will be, but at the moment you don't want to be very definitive about any of that.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. They operate differently to tabloid headline newspaper writers. Yeah. So I can understand that. Okay, so again, we're just kind of, it's just a little bit sobering to be reliant on the powers that be, given their slowness to act and given their recent history of tricking around with, say, the pub closing times. You just go, sure, we won't make it 5, we'll make it 8.
Yeah, I mean, that decision could well end up costing us a couple of months of being in lockdown. Like, it seems, like I think I said at the time, it was pretty foolish.
Well, it's like one of those things about, like, either make a decision and actually shut them down entirely, or go better, rather than, it just seems to be like making a different decision to just really show that you're in charge.
Yeah, it made no sense, because it was like
you're not in charge of anything.
Yeah. Like, it wasn't a particularly commercially viable decision for an awful lot of places, because you don't have enough turnover in that period, even at Christmas, to make enough money for it to be worthwhile. No. And it probably kicked the legs out from under the reducing social contact end of things, because the things, if you go out drinking, a few hurried pints till you get to 8 o'clock, the odds of you then deciding, instead of going home at 8, you're going to go on to somebody's house or whatever, are quite high.
Damage is already done.
Yeah.
But then it all seems to be about like sending a message that we're in charge, so we don't actually necessarily have to listen to the medical people or the science people.
Yeah.
And
again, unfortunately, exactly what the virus is in charge.
Yeah, exactly. It's like and those are the people that you should listen to, because the virus is the one that they know how to counteract. You don't have a clue. And now we have to wait for them to get back together and decide. Hopefully, we'll hear it at NPHET or meeting anyway, and then we can just hope that things speed up and that there is some sort of action taken quickly.
It'll all become a lot clearer by the weekend anyway.
We've been waiting for it, but and even then it'll be like we're still waiting we'll be waiting on the hard data in terms of what the scientists say about this thing. But it's quite obvious that we're heading in a very upward trajectory. Charts are. It's all the hockey. What do you call it? The
hockey stick. Yeah.
So we're all just taking off. It's like Cape Canaveral. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Short and sweet.
Quick update.
Thanks.